Hi, this is Jim Ruff. Welcome to the, I usually blow the guest's name, not my own. This is Jim Ruff. Welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. I'm here today with Dr. Kim Rotchard, who has been doing some really interesting things in the realm of practicing medicine in regarding bridging East and West. And so that was the title we chose today, but I'm not sure where we're going to go. We may go all over the place, but regarding talking about democracy and the Wisdom Council and trying to blending Kim's practice. There, I blew your name too. So Kim, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your practice and how you see that working.
Well, in view of that subject, bridging East and West, another little way of saying the practice of medical acupuncture is helping people know the best of both worlds. It's not an either or, it's kind of a both in that sense of bringing together, bridging. From an Oriental medical standpoint, it's the separation is illusionary. If you like, the yin kind of becomes yang, the yang becomes yin, night turns into day, day turns into night, and it's all part of just what it is to have a new day, is to have this integration of these different aspects. And so I'd like to see my practice as a bridging, but even on another level, kind of just that bringing together, but recognizing the integration is there to start with. It's just being aware of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We got together a little bit Saturday morning, and because I practice medicine that involves two different models, and really Oriental medicine is a different model of medicine than our Western model, and I could easily speak a long time on that. But I think for where we're going this morning, what would be fascinating is, as a result of being aware of these different models, it's really brought up to me that the practice of medicine or medical models are kind of like religious models. And in fact, just personally, it's easy for me to see that a lot of things that bring people together, especially in cultures, organizations, have a religious aspect to them. For me, it's clear that medicine and different systems of medicine bring in elements of religion in terms of basic precepts, belief systems. You know, and oftentimes have the same intent, wanting to reduce suffering, potentiate life and fullness of life. That's the objective, I think, of many religions, and comes from our sense of compassion for one another. We're wanting to develop that, develop what is in terms of people experiencing more greater joy in their life, peace, and there being more harmony and balance. Well, yeah, there are medical models that look at that. There are religious models. So I think that was the question I was going to have for you. How is what you're proposing similar or different, or how is it like another religion? And if it is like another religion, why develop a new religion? Why not work on what's already been done?
Yeah. Well, it was a great question, and I knew you were going to ask it. It's interesting. The Wisdom Council approach, the National Wisdom Council approach, I believe, would transform society, and it would transform people in society in ways similar to the way what religions are trying to do. It would help us have a more holistic sense of who we are and what we're about, and be more spiritual and be more spiritually connected to one another. So, and that's really what the many religions have been doing for a long time, or been trying to do. But the difference is that this is not a religion. It's the religions are trying to do it person by person. They're trying to reach out and help people have a religious experience as individuals. What I believe I've discovered is a systemic alignment, a systemic arrangement in our society. It's kind of like having people out there and fooling around over in the corners and realizing there's a light switch over here on the wall that I can flip. And all of a sudden, if I flip it this way, people are loving and enjoy one another and work collaboratively together. And if I flip it another way, they go back to fighting and having wars and building more weapons than we want to have and so forth. That's a very difficult message to sell, almost like a religion, because part of our culture, our paradigm, is that, hey, it's just me here. We're all individuals. And we don't want to be aware, some of us, that we're determined in many ways by some system that's in place.
Excuse me, I forgot to turn off my cellular phone. Jeez Louise. A little embarrassing, okay. But anyway, there it is. Let me turn this off here so it doesn't come up again here.
One of the things I'm sensitive to, or whenever I talk about the Wisdom Council, is the interesting interruptions that happen. I mean, as long as we're talking about Eastern and Western.
Yeah, coincidence.
An Eastern point is what are those coincidences? And isn't it interesting that whenever I start to talk about the Wisdom Council, amazing interruptions happen. And I don't think it's you. I think it's just life. It feels like it's almost a message from the universe saying, Jim, slow down. People aren't ready for this. Just take it easy. Or I'm not sure. But so anyway, I think people, we have individuals, we have an individualistic thing. So if I go to somebody and tell them that this is a solution, this is the solution, is almost the way I want to say it.
Yeah.
That we can flip this switch, and now all of a sudden a lot of what the churches, Christian and Muslim and whatever, are trying to have happen, can now start happening in terms of just people being more, and even the East religions. I think it's that fundamental, that we are so much like fish in a sea. We do not see the effects of the system around us. And so we have health effects that are largely due to the sea that we're in, as well as our own holistic sense of well-being and so forth. But I thought of an example. I know they've done studies, and these are the ones I've read were quite old, but depending on what kind of work environment a person has, if they feel that they're in control of their work environment, their health, they're far less likely to have health problems and cardiac, especially they did research on cardiac type problems. But if somebody's a worker who's being treated like you're just a worker here, move this to there, we tell you what to do, you don't have control here, you're just a body doing a man-hour of labor, that person is liable to have more stress, heart attacks type stuff than top management, by far. Well, they don't know that they're in that environment. They just carry on.
Yes.
And that was set by their environment. They're just doing what they can, and they're in fact probably telling themselves, hey, I just go through my day, I don't really care, I get paid, they tell me what to do, I do what I'm told. They're telling themselves that, and they think they're doing that. But that's not what's really happening.
A question there. I think you haven't convinced me that it isn't very similar to another religion. No, yeah, I mean, I'm hardcore here, okay?
Yeah.
So, but for example, in that example you talked about too, isn't there kind of a belief system that we need to even be in control? I mean, isn't that part of our cultural milieu, part of being American and how we're programmed, we think we need? On another level, I think there might be religious beliefs that would say, well, it's illusionary to think you are in control ever.
Right.
And that you should be in control, or you need to be in control. And that some of this stress from not being in control is buying into the illusion of control.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, that's what really sort of what the paradigm shift is about, is that to me there's two fundamental paradigms of change. One fundamental paradigm of change is that if I want to move this glass to move, if I'm going to change this glass, it's me changing that glass. I'm an outside, alive being that acts as a cause to this dead stuff that gets moved. And that's the paradigm, that a paradigm of control. That there's a living element that's the cause that sets up or acts on dead stuff. So our management structure, for instance, is set up that way, that management's alive. They're the living force. But the dead stuff is the people underneath them, and they need to be motivated. And they motivate them with incentives or recognition or some kind of compensation or something like that. So it's just the same model of change. Here's this dead stuff. I move it. I'm the alive. That's the dead stuff. And that's our model of management. And so the more we put people in that model, the more they suffer heart attacks and their living beingness is lost. The other model of change, or another separate model of change, which is more fundamental, I think, is the self-organizing change. That there's like plants in the garden, that everything's alive. This table's alive. Somehow this table just grew. I mean, the universe got started and Big Bang happened, and now all of a sudden this table's growing and life's growing and I'm growing, and we ended up here in a studio. And so in other words, everything's living, everything's growing, things are just making themselves happen, and there's God within, so to speak.
Right.
And so the God, extrinsic God that acts, and the intrinsic God that acts. That's more of an Eastern philosophy. What the Wisdom Council approach that I would propose is essentially making that shift. It's turning that light switch from an extrinsically oriented system to an intrinsically oriented paradigm and system. Because the Wisdom Council, currently, we've lost track. See, the founders set up, they were like Deus ex machina. They set up a system, and we live in that system.
Mm-hmm.
The founders set up the Constitution. It's like the king. We got rid of the king that was in charge of everything, but now we've got this document that's in charge of everything. And there's no way to kind of be a we the people. We're all within this box. And so we live inside of it. And and that's a control model. The rule of law. Like it's a heresy to say anything against the rule of law, but it's not the way you'd run your family, or it's not the way you'd run a company. It's not the way you run anything that's alive. You wouldn't run it that way. But when we're thinking dead stuff, yeah, sure, the rule of law. Here's your rules. Stay within those boundaries. Now I can leave. Hands-off management kind of thing. So the Wisdom Council process, the National Wisdom Council, really is about eliciting and evoking a we the people that's in charge. And it really is about following the energy, finding out what people care about, what's really important to you, and having that conversation. And having that conversation be more fundamental than the rule of law. And it is about turning that switch over in the corner, so now we all kind of become more intrinsically oriented instead of extrinsically driven. And so in that sense, I think the results are religion, and certainly my attitude about this, I'm an evangelist. I mean, I think, but the change that's happened for me is I don't need to be an evangelist. I don't need to convince anybody anymore. I just need to convince enough people. I used to think we needed a constitutional amendment. Now I realize that, we needed a we the people to spark a we the people. Now I realize we can do that in a more living method consistent with the process. We just need a few of us. Mm-hmm. And we've got some plans to do it. So I don't have to be as evangelical as I was anymore.
Let me get back to my question. And this might be my bugaboo, and I apologize to the audience or whatever, but it's kind of something that interests me. Why is it necessary? For example, I'm not that familiar with Taoism or Buddhism. I know a little bit. My familiarity is mainly in a Judeo-Christian tradition. But a lot of what you're saying, I could correlate to the Judeo-Christian. Old St. Patrick that was saying, the living is in everything, Christ in all. The Easter message, why look for the living amongst the dead? your emphasis on looking at the life and seeing Christ in all would be some of the Judeo-Christian language about communicating where the life really is, and if we don't pay attention to that, there's going to be chaos and death and unnecessary suffering. I'm sure that within Buddhism there's all kinds of other precepts about accessing that, obviously looking at the inside stuff in terms of not having external but seeing it as intrinsic. Why recreate? Why come up with another model? I mean, do you understand my question?
Well, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think I too believe that Jesus the man was talking about this. I think that's what he was trying to talk about. I think the church that followed put the old box around it and boxed it up as, you know, something that's actually a hierarchical thing, a Deus ex machina thing.
Yes.
I mean, the way I read what Jesus was talking about, he was talking about the God within more. I mean, you have to do a little editing, which I do at times. But when Jesus was asked, for instance, "Are you the Son of God?" there are 9 answers in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Mm-hmm.
He was asked, and there are 9 different times that he answered. I mean, there were 3 different times he answered the questions, but 3 accounts of each one. Mm-hmm. And basically, twice he says, "Hey, don't get hung up with me. It's not about me."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the truer answer. The others, I think, were modified a little bit by the church and said, where he basically says, "Yes, I am." I think that the truer answer is the ones, I've forgotten which sections they're in, but where he says, "Hey, don't get hung up with me. This is about discovering this quality of God in life." And there are a lot of other, I mean, I've done some study in this, but a long time ago, and I don't remember, but there's lots of situations. I mean, his whole idea of telling parables, for instance, the whole idea of telling parables is to try, you can't communicate this kind of knowing.
Awareness, yeah.
Yeah, you can't, you can kind of point to it.
Yes.
And you tell a story about how this might be true in your life, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what, but then you come along with people who don't really understand, people who gather that there was something going on here, that this is really important, this has deep meaning, and they put a box around it, and they put a hierarchy around it, and now all of a sudden you've got everything is about salvation. You need a dispensation from the Pope, or you've got to look to the priest, and certainly you can't know God for yourself, and so the whole Catholic hierarchy structure gets built, and then people sort of lose track of that sense of God for themselves.
Yes.
I mean.
Well, am I hearing you correctly that if I were to kind of get the drift of what I'm hearing, is that there's a lot of baggage that comes along with religions in terms of traditions and people and organizations that interfere with this process that you envision that would be transformative in terms of our society. So your answer to my question is this baggage that it may not be inherent or necessary, but it just comes with the current religions that we are currently experiencing.
It comes with it, but in my mind, this switch would end that. I mean, I really think that it's possible to design a structure that establishes, basically, and that structure is very simple. We just meet. We just call a timeout. We all agree that we're going to call a timeout every 3 months or so, and we're going to just kind of step aside and talk from the heart and come up with consensus views. And then we're going to go back into the game or into the ball game that we're playing here of maximizing profits and maximizing the bottom line or whatever else we're doing. But we're going to type that timeout, which is what the Wisdom Council structure, National Wisdom Council structures into place, where we visit again about what's really important and how are we doing and is this working, or we like what's happening, and come up with unanimous choices again, and then we carry on. And what this does is it provides a way for the conversation of all of us to be the real bottom line. Right now, the real bottom line is corporate profits. It's the Constitution has set up these players, and they're playing a game, and the really competent players are the corporate profits. So in your healthcare world, for instance, it's really about, we're not doing research to find what's best for people that's cheapest. We're doing research to find what's best for corporations to make the most money. That's what we're researching for drugs. And why even drugs? I mean, we don't need drugs half the time. We could be doing things like acupuncture and things like that, which you do, but the system itself is driving us away from that. It's driving us toward products that make money for corporations. That's what healthcare is really about in the bottom line. Even though every person I talk to, or you and I talk to, when I go to the hospital, all the people want to help you and cure you and help people. But the bottom line of the system is corporate profits.
Yes.
And we need a system to help us go transcend that, to have our collective intelligence and our collective wisdom to release that, so that we can be the people we really intend to be, the people that we can be commonsensical at a collective level as well as at an individual level.
Using an Oriental model in terms of a distinction, and again, it's not black and white, but clearly Oriental medicine is more interested in relationships and the nature of relationships. You know, in Western medicine, typically a doctor will make a problem-oriented approach. They'll list, 10 or 12 diagnoses. In Oriental medicine, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's the relationship between all those.
Yeah.
And what's generating that list.
Yeah.
That's really important. Yeah. That's really a foreign way of thinking.
Yes.
And so I hear you through my own lens here,
Yeah.
but I'm hearing that importance you're starting to see or vocalize in your own way about the importance of relationships.
Yes.
And facilitating relationships through
Exactly.
appropriate dialogue.
Exactly. No, that's really true. It's about what problem would not be fundamentally changed if all of us were talking respectfully and listening to one another and making joint decisions together? I mean, name the problem. Maybe asteroids hitting planet Earth, but even that, we would be thinking better about it and making better solutions. So there's no problem that would be unaffected by all of us just putting aside our competitive modalities and being thoughtful and wise and respectful and visiting together about what's best for everybody. And I think that is, okay, we can spend a lot of time trying to teach people to have that attitude, but our system is structured not to have that be the predominant perspective. We are in a system that will reward the opposite.
Yes.
So if you want to serve society and want to be respectful and so forth, our system says, sorry, we're not even going to pay for that. You won't earn a salary.
In medicine, the corollary that you're talking about is how real this is in that system, is the emphasis is on the objective, what you can see and what you can measure. Now, as soon as you start talking about relationships, you're talking about subjective.
Yes.
And what I like to say to people, we have a subjective bias toward the objective, what can be touched,
Yes.
felt in the material.
Yeah.
The economic world, the objective. And what you're saying, really, is that these things, relationships and dialogue, there is something real here. We can't really see it on an X-ray, or we can't do a lab test, but these elements of relationship clearly affect reality.
Yes. And even more, I'm saying that the reason why the doctors focus on objective stuff is structural.
Yes.
That we can go over here to this light switch, flip this light switch, and then the doctors won't. Because the system itself is structured that way. Just look at the Constitution. It's, did you follow the rule, or did you follow the Constitution, or not?
Yes.
That's the bottom line of our society.
Yes.
Whereas if we had this richer, deeper, we the people conversation, there would be a new bottom line of society. The new bottom line would be our feelings about it. How does it work for you? How does it work for me? How's this How's that? That would become the new bottom line. We would still go into the games and the structured places and do maybe the same thing, but we would have a larger perspective to bring to it that would be the common sense perspective. And so, yes, it's not only real, it's structural. And we can we can go over, if we can see that structure, if we have the consciousness to see that structure, we can go over here and tweak that.
This whole thing in our American belief system of separation in state and religion, I think it becomes a little dicey here. I'm just sharing that whole sense of, you know, that old saying, render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's.
Right.
I think we're talking about that duality and the issues that keep that duality as it is.
Yes.
And the Constitution the way it is, and why that we're uncomfortable, and even the history of Western medicine. You know, Descartes and trying a separation from the church, and science is going to be over here and religion's over here. And now we're starting to see, well, wait a sec here. Where does one start and the other stop? It's a little dicey here.
Right.
And
No,
I think you're hitting it hard, I think, Jim.
Well, it's interesting that you brought this whole topic up because it's something that I would never touch normally. But, but I didn't mention it in my book, actually. Yeah. If we're going to have a bottom line that's black and white, like the Constitution and so forth, if we're going to live in that kind of box society, I call it, I want a separation of church and state. I want to be protected from somebody else imposing their will on me. But if we're going to live in this conversation that's holistic and thoughtful and wise and stuff, well, now all of a sudden I want the spiritual to be part of what we're doing here. And everybody does, because it just naturally is. So it changes really everything. It would change our relationship to spirituality, I think, in a huge way. Originally it was a constitutional amendment. Right. It would change spirituality. Now I think we can do it anyway. I think we don't need a constitutional. I mean, I tried to convince people, and that wasn't going to work. I mean, that was going to take forever. But now I think I can show people, and everybody's just going to go, yeah, of course we need to do this. And in fact, the plans are to do a national trial, hopefully, to have a day of national conversation on September 11th, and precede that with the Wisdom Council in August, a National Wisdom Council in Springfield, Illinois. And we just need some money right now to do that, but I think that's the goal. So, and if that were to happen over time, to do that Wisdom Council and so forth, I think we'd start to reshape the situation. I'm getting the signals that we need to
stop the discussion.
Soon. Kim, this has just been wonderful. I really appreciate your
I'll just leave. I'm not good on Latin or Greek, but I think religion, even actually that word means bringing people together. I mean, there's something within that word, connecting together.
Binding back
or
something like that, yeah.
So it's probably, you know, there is a corollary here, or some sort of.
It's what the real sense of it is.
Yes.
Well, Kim Rotchard, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Glad to be here. Thank you.